And so I will read I think I need to get this motion on the table. And it reads, whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody just make sure if you're not, we are all muted, please. Exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding into closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this council proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to 1, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including town or local board employees and board members, which would be item A, and item E. A proposed or pending acquisition or disposal of land for town or local board purposes, and that would be item D. 3, labor relations or employee negotiations, that would be item E. The receiving of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and that would be item B. And finally, an ongoing investigation respecting the municipality, a local board, or a municipally controlled corporation by the Ombudsman appointed under the Ombudsman Act, an ombudsman referred to in subsection 223 sub 13 sub 1 of this act, or the investigator referred to in subsection 239.2 sub 1, and that would be item F. So if I could get a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey. And I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So we will go in camera now. And I guess just for our audience, we will be using the same link for our meeting at 5 p.m. So once we rise from in camera, the link will remain open until 5 p.m.
Excuse me, Your Worship, you're live again.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, Council, I will look for a motion. The Council rise from in camera and return to open session at 4:45 p.m. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman, Councillor Doherty. All in favor? That is carried. And then I will recess the meeting. And I think we'll start again at 5 p.m. So we'll be back for our regular meeting at 5 p.m. So we have 15 minutes and we'll recess. So see you all very shortly. Thank you. It's 5 o'clock and time to get down to work. It's Monday, December 20th. And this is our last meeting of this year. So thank you to council and staff for a very, very busy year. It certainly has not been the easiest of circumstances. And I compliment everyone on the excellent job. We've moved the ball, I think, quite a bit over the past year. And I want to wish all our residents a very happy holiday and Merry Christmas and all the best for a safe and healthy 2022. This is not where we hoping to be for this upcoming holiday, and I hope everyone will please take all the precautions to protect your friends and your family and your health. And we hopefully will be able to get boosters. I know I had my booster shot last weekend, and we're opening it up to the general public. So get vaccinated often, wear your mask, and please take care. With that, I'll read the land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe and Ottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous peoples within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in the area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda, and the motion reads that the content of the council agenda for December 20, 2021 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor McLeod, all in favor. That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest. Council, any declarations tonight? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just for public disclosure, I did declare 2 conflicts within our in-camera meeting, specifically items 4.1A and C. One as with respect to the Culbert Estate, as I am a principal on a board of directors in this matter, and also with respect to Trails and Advisory as an immediate family member is currently on that committee. And both of those conflicts will carry into this council meeting under 4.3 and 4.4, I think, or did I reverse those? There may be 4.3 and 4.4 in camera and 4.1A and C in this meeting, and also 13.2 under bylaws 2021-093 with respect to the appointment to the Trails and Advisory Committee, again, because an immediate family member is on the committee.
Yes, I think it will come up under the bylaw. I'm just going to look for clerk on this on that. We dealt with the other way in camera, and I confirm that you declared your conflict and you recused yourself from both those issues in camera.
Thank you.
So that brings us then to adoption of the minutes. The resolution reads that the regular meeting of council held December, or that the minutes of the council meeting held December 13, 2021 be approved as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman, Councillor Doherty. Any errors or omissions, council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Is there any business arising from the previous minutes, council? Seeing none, then we will move on to community announcements, and I will start with you, Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, and I only have 3. So I would like to, actually 4. I would like to congratulate my fellow members of the Collingwood Curling Club for vastly outdoing themselves this year with regard to the food bank drive that we recently held. And our goal was to raise $5,000. Last year we raised $4,000. And do remember that was a year in which we only curled for 7 weeks. So our goal was to raise $5,000 to be split equally among the Salvation Army and St. Vincent de Paul. And we raised $7,600 in the course of a week. And it may be even more than that. And so those were handed over by the president of the curling club last week, and very proud to be part of that group. I want to also notice that since we are all heading off on vacations, hopefully for some rest and relaxation, if you find yourself with a few hours that you're sick of Netflix or Prime or Disney Plus, you may want to head on over to the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority's website, ndca.on.ca, where you will find a beautiful piece of work that has been done by the educational staff that we pay for through our levy in the budget, and although not perhaps forever. And what they've done is put together a tour of the Great Lakes. And it includes a whole lot about Collingwood, including a view of Collingwood from the Widewakowin, I know I've got that wrong, outlook that has not yet been open to the public. It's just off George Johnson Road, and it's at the top of a former landfill, and you can see all the way to the terminals from Barrie. It's amazing. And so drone footage of the menacing wetlands is included in the and there's discussion about Indigenous relations with colonizers and the history of the Great Lakes and species at risk and amazing things that have been used as a learning tool for thousands, literally thousands of students in the Simcoe Muskoka District School Board, grades 9 and 10 science, geography, and history classes. So they're 10 minutes here and there, 13 minutes here and there, 7 minutes here and there. If you want to just take a break from your usual viewing, it's really, really worth it. I learned so much, even about Collingwood shipbuilding history. As part of the Great Lakes. And the third thing is that I took a walk this week down the train trail and the Hamilton train trail and all the trails and crossed Hurontario Street safely and happily with the help of a signalized intersection. I know that this has been a lot of conversation about this particular spot in our town, and very, very happy to note that it is up and running, and with great thanks to the persistence and work of our Public Works department. So those are my 3 things.
Thank you for that, Councillor. And the lookout that you're talking about was the home of Fort Minising way back when, and the beautiful statue that used to be in front of the Simcoe County Museum of the Portage has now been placed up on that lookout, and they will be developing that site. It was a key trading outpost for the trade coming up from Toronto up to Georgian Bay, so the shores of Georgian Bay. So lots of history there, and I will be tuning into those MPCA videos. They sound very interesting. And with that, I will look to Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a couple of soft announcements. First, there are many who will be struggling over this Christmas season, and I hope all of us will remember that there are many opportunities to make charitable donations to help out those families through our local churches, through the Salvation Army, and through the food bank. And I hope, if you're so inclined, that you will do so. And then secondly, just to my esteemed colleagues and to our wonderful town staff and to our wonderful residents, in the words of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope it's a good one without any fear. And that's it for me, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. And also, we'll put in a pitch for the Butterfly Project. If you have food donations, you can drop those off at the Youth Center on First Street. Councillor Jeffrey. No, you're right. I got out of order. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey. My apologies, Councillor Berman. I got out of order here.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson, and I fully support Councillor Doherty's comment that we need to support as many people in our community as we can and as we are able. And just really to wish everyone all peace, happiness, and good health over the holidays, but also for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berman, you're batting cleanup today.
I think it was force of habit there. You know, I usually pass, so you just assumed, which was a good one. I have nothing tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also just wanted to wish council, staff, and our community a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and best wishes for the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a quick announcement of Christmas presents for council. One of them is business. Our new procedural bylaw has been uploaded, and so I've asked our assistant Jenny Haynes to make hard copies and put them in your mailboxes so everyone will have the most up-to-date procedural bylaw for 2022. And then Christmas ornaments. These are the gifts this year. Staff has prepared these. They have the grain terminals on the front, and on the back they say none of us is as strong as all of us, which was our saying in 2021 for staff, and was also the theme of our last levy. And hopefully we'll be able to do our levy in person this year. So we'll look forward to that so we can honor the great volunteers in our community. And with that, I'm going to just acknowledge that CAO Skinner has started her holiday And so the clerk Amos is filling in tonight. She has the big role to keep us all in order, as well as fulfill the CAO duties. And so with that, I will pass over 8.1 is the update on the water capacity and land use planning study. So I will pass that over to Clerk Amos to get started.
Thank you, Your Worship. So tonight to present the updates pertaining to the water capacity and the land use planning study, we have Director Valentine and Director Slama.
Welcome, Peggy and Summer.
Thank
Take
you,
it
Your
away.
Worship. I'll start the presentation this evening in the absence of CAO Skinner. So next slide, please. So thank you. So as directed by council resolution, each week at a council meeting or a committee meeting, staff provide an update on various items related to the ICBL and the available water capacity at our water treatment plant. So these updates include any information on the status of negotiations related to Collingwood's water supply agreements with New Tecumseh and Town of the Blue Mountains, any updates on items related to the water treatment plant expansion, and those might include procurement, design, timing of commissioning, and funding. Exemptions that have been requested from the ICBL, an update on the number of building permit applications and occupancy permits that have been issued in 2021, as well as specific building permit and occupancy status data on developments that received an exemption from the ICBL since April. And lastly, an update on the remaining water supply capacity available in single dwelling units and cubic meters once all of the interim water treatment plant work and exemptions are considered. So all of this information will be reviewed in our presentation this evening. Next slide, please. So just to provide a summary of our situation. So Collingwood's situation as it relates to development and the available water capacity is as follows. Our current water supply is safe and available to the residents of Collingwood. As soon as council was made aware of this difficult situation, they acted swiftly and transparently on a proactive path to seek and secure further capacity while diligently managing the water capacity that remains available. Following staff's recommendation, council enacted an interim control bylaw to temporarily and transparently pause development. Through the ICBL process, council are ensuring that the people of Collingwood have the water that they need and ensuring that Collingwood will grow as a complete community. Exemptions were provided through the ICBL, and those included any developments that were in a status of ready to go, ready to proceed in 2021. So those and had approved applications. Also, most residential renovations and additions work can continue as long as they don't result in any additional water taking. Those are allowed to proceed. And we see that this continued allowable building is supported by the information that CBO Miller provides in this presentation, and we see that later on in a following slide. Staff and the supporting consultants continue to work to follow an aggressive schedule to ensure that the interim disinfection is implemented at our existing water treatment plant so that our capacity is restored in the winter, and also working diligently towards our expansion project to ensure that our capacity is expanded by early 2026. Okay, so that's a summary of our situation. So next slide, please. We'll move on to the water capacity update. So to provide you some information about what has happened recently on the water capacity side, we have some updates related to the water treatment plant expansion. The UV, the ultraviolet vendor has been selected through a competitive procurement process. It will be Denora. So this is the type of equipment that will be used in the interim disinfection at our existing water treatment plant, and also it will be used in the expansion as well. So this manufacturer has been selected and the PO has been issued for the interim disinfection. And we remain on the path to hopefully have that equipment installed and commissioned before winter 2022-23. We had the pre-selection of the membrane treatment process. It closed on November 29th. The manufacturer has been selected, and that will be Suez. So they will provide the membranes for our expanded water treatment plant capacity. And in the near future, I believe at the February DNO meeting, we're intending to also provide a staff report that speaks to the option of installing membranes before the expansion and looking at augmenting our capacity before the expansion is brought online. So that will be coming forward. And I just also wanted to mention that, you know, Suez was previously Zeeweed, and they have a long history with Collingwood. It was Zeeweed membranes that were installed in the Collingwood ultrafiltration plant back in 1998. And at the time, that was the first time that ultrafiltration was used for water treatment in Ontario, and it was one of the first 2 plants in Canada as well. So it's great too. They're excited to continue with their relationship with Collingwood. Of course, the process has evolved over the last 20 plus years, and they are one manufacturer of membrane that can provide a very compact treatment process. And that's important for us as we look to expanding on our existing site, because we will eventually have some confines on our site. And so going with a manufacturer that can provide a high amount of capacity in a small footprint is very advantageous to Collingwood. So we're pleased with that. Also, we're just completing our pre-qualification process for the general contractors, which will support our alternative project delivery. Those submissions have been evaluated, and procurement is just in the process of issuing the award letters. So I will save the release of the names for the new year in a future meeting. Our consultant work for the third-party review of the chlorine addition continues. And this consultant will also be working on an approach for tracking our services allocation, which will follow the water allocation policy that is eventually adopted by Collingwood. And finally, we have mentioned that Simcoe County is currently working through a service review of water and wastewater services. And we are expecting some technical memos from their consultant, R.V. Anderson, in December. I have not seen either of these technical memos yet, but hopefully we will see those shortly. Next slide, please. So last week in this weekly update, Manager of Environmental Services, Heather McGinnity, and Project Manager Ken Caden, who is heading our water treatment plant project, provided an update to Council on the progress that has been achieved over the last 6 months on our expansion project. So Council back in April or May tasked staff to think innovatively and act swiftly in all efforts to keep the timeline of the expanded capacity as winter 2025-26. Our internal team, together with our engineering consultants, AECOM and Ainley Group, have done exactly that over the last 6 months. In the update last week, we provided information and visually showed how some of the milestones on our project timeline have changed slightly in their description and timing due to the implementation of some innovative project delivery options. However, even with the changes in the milestone timelines, the end remains the same, and we continue to believe that the expanded capacity can be online before 2026. So this chart here today, this milestone timeline flow chart, has been updated to reflect the changes that Manager McGinnity spoke about last week. So the items in dark blue are items that are complete, and the items in gray are to come. Most recently, we have completed the pre-selection of the UV and the membrane equipment, which I just spoke about in the previous slide. And again, we are looking at UV that will restore our winter capacity before winter 22-23. And we have also completed the pre-qualification for the general contractors, and they will be working with our consultants through the preliminary design, and they will be the contractors that will eventually bid on the construction of the works. And looking at the timeline on the right, we have been communicating with New Tecumseh this fall regarding the water supply agreement, and staff are evaluating the implementation of reduced supply to both New Tecumseh and Town of Blue Mountains through winter 2022. So we're just looking at the demands that we're seeing today and seeing if we need to implement reduced supply as we had previously communicated to those municipalities. And next slide, please. So this is our chart, which has been updated as per the exemptions that were approved last week. So when we look at the remaining allocation, we have 493 single dwelling units or equivalent single dwelling units available, and 445 cubic meters available for distribution to future development. Next slide, please. And Your Worship, I'm not sure if we want to take questions at the end of the presentation or if Director Valentine should just proceed.
Why don't we do questions now
Okay.
on your portion, Director Slama. So are there any questions, Council, for Director Slama on the presentation so far? I'm not seeing any. So then Director Valentine, you're up. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks to Director Slama for undertaking what turns out to be the bulk of this presentation. Good evening to everyone, including members of the public that are watching today's meeting. This portion of the presentation provides an overall review of the status of the land use planning policy study, which is the subject of a more detailed presentation later in this meeting as well. The recommendations of the land use planning policy study are intended to form the basis for a servicing capacity allocation framework for the town of Collingwood moving into the future. So as we look at this next slide, it prompts us to recall that Council has considered and granted a number of exemptions to the interim control bylaw, and those were primarily for larger scale shovel-ready projects or other projects that were anticipated to be prepared to go to construction in 2021 and early 2022. As well, more recently, 5 exemptions were also approved that would facilitate the redevelopment of commercial properties where no additional water capacity was needed, as well as the construction of accessory residential dwelling units. To assist with the housing crisis, exemption requests for accessory dwelling units will continue to be considered on a case-by-case basis as they do arise. Now, exemptions are to get us through this land use policy planning study period. And once that study is completed and implemented and the interim control bylaw is repealed, any developments that haven't proceeded to building permit stage will be evaluated using the servicing capacity allocation framework that is approved by council. So we just did send out an email clarification to all those who have received an exemption, encouraging them to proceed to the building permit stage prior to the expiry of the interim control bylaw in order to take advantage of the exemption that they do have. And for projects without exemptions, the planning process can continue up to, but not including the point of decision. As we look at the next slide, this is our familiar timeline for the land use planning policy study. And you can see that the green arrow aligns with tonight's meeting, which is the presentation of updated recommendations following an initial round of public engagement. And pending council's decision tonight, this chart is likely to change as we will extend parts of the study into the new year. Next slide, please. One of the critical components of the proposed servicing capacity allocation framework is a zoning bylaw amendment, which would essentially act as a safeguard, ensuring that building permits cannot be issued unless the municipality confirms that adequate water and wastewater capacity is available. This product, as updated, is part of your agenda package today, and it certainly was informed by what we heard through the public engagement opportunities at the end of November, which included 2 virtual sessions, as well as the submission of over 30 commenting letters. If this zoning bylaw amendment is appealed, the interim control bylaw will be automatically extended until the appeal is resolved. And that's why you see this accelerated timeline to move forward with the zoning component of the study, so that council can be aware of the appeal landscape prior to April and make any interim decisions that may be required. Next slide, please. So we're transitioning now into the building permit statistics, and this slide represents a good news story. In almost all of the categories, it's showing that building permits have either exceeded or come close to 2020 numbers, other than occupancy permits, which are lagging behind slightly, but are expected to catch up early in the new year. We would normally be moving to our familiar pie graph, but unfortunately, we have removed that from the presentation tonight because we are updating it to account for the additional 5 projects that were granted exemptions, and we want to ensure that those charts are up to date and accurate. They will be reincorporated into the next version of the presentation for the new year. Next slide, please. So that does bring us to the conclusion of the presentation. If there are any questions on the land use planning policy study, I'm happy to address them at this time. And also there'll be a further opportunity to discuss that matter when we have the presentation from the study team's lead consultant later in the agenda.
Thank you, Director Valentine. Council, any questions or comments on that portion of the presentation? Seeing none, thank you both. Well, Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one quick question through you to Director Valentine. You alluded to the fact that those who have received an exemption have until the expiration of the ICBL to pick up their building permit. How many applicants do we have in the wings who are seeking or still seeking exemptions, who might be able to move forward a little bit more quickly than those who have not picked up their building permits?
Director Valentine.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Doherty. If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if there's some exemptions that are sort of in the hopper that didn't get approved through the round of exemptions that Council undertook in the summer that could possibly be considered sometime next year if there was still capacity available that hadn't been used up by those who were granted an exemption. And I don't have the number off the top of my head. The difficulty, though, is once you've granted an exemption to the ICBL, that exemption lasts for the life period of the bylaw. So those individuals that have exemptions today can apply for building permits anytime up to and including the date that the bylaw is repealed. So if we were to add a bunch more exemptions, assuming that many of them won't cross the finish line, then we do risk having more exemptions than we could potentially be able to service. So that's the legal sort of tricky part with that. I do understand that this council has discussed sort of that idea of those who haven't performed, if we could somehow pull back on their exemptions, but there is no mechanism to do so once they've been exempted from the bylaw.
Thank you. And that's exactly the purpose of my question. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
I guess just the other clarification on that is that if they do not use the exemption before the ICBL is removed, then they're going to go back to into the key and they'll have to qualify under the water allocation framework. So the exemption they get won't survive the end of the ICBL. They'll go back to square one and have to apply for a building permit under the water allocation framework. Is that right, Director Valentine?
That's correct, Your Worship, unless council would be looking at extending those exemptions as part of an exemption to the new framework. And this is sort of jumping ahead a bit to the next presentation, but some of the smaller scale projects for individual dwellings have requested to be exempted from the allocation policy itself, which would in effect carry forward the exemptions past the ICBL period, but council would need to make that decision if it's appropriate to do so.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions, council? Seeing none, that takes us, thank you both for that update, and we'll look forward to the upcoming report. That takes us to the Standing Committee report, and we have the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee meeting of December 6, 2021. It's a long resolution, so bear with me. The council received the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held December 6, 2021, and hereby approved the recommendations contained within the report as presented. P 2021-30 part lot control exemption, round bracket Indigo Estates, end bracket Eden Oak McNabb. And the resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-83, being a bylaw to authorize part lot control exemption for a period of 2 years to allow for the creation of 5 lots on the western portion of block 287, plan 51M 1162 for single detached dwellings be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. P 2021-35 heritage designation of 243 Birch Street. Council and the recommendation reads that council initiate the process to designate 243 Birch Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act by directing staff to issue a notice of intention to designate and direct staff to bring forward a designation bylaw for 243 Birch Street within 120 days of the publication of the notice of intention to designate. P 2021-36 delegated authority and criteria for condominium exemptions. Resolution reads that council enact and pass bylaw number 2021-82, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2013-34, the designating signing authority planning act as follows. 1, clarify the process for condominium exemptions, and 2, to explicitly delegate authority to the Director of Planning, Building, and Economic Development or their designate to exempt certain classes of condominium description from approval under the Planning Act subject to criteria. And further, that staff develop the appropriate internal processes to facilitate the implementation of condominium exemptions based on the criteria outlined in Appendix A, including a communication plan for the development community. P 2021-20 assumption of the Mountain Croft subdivision, phases 4 and 5. Resolution reads assumption of all municipal works within phases 4 and 5 of the Mountain Croft subdivision, and the bylaw number 2021-84 being a bylaw to assume the roads within phases 4 and 5 of the Mountain Croft subdivision be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. PW 2021-18 transit service review and optimization study final recommendations. The resolution reads approval of a phased implementation strategy for recommendations 1 to 5 and 7 to 9 of the recommendations from IBI group outlined in their final report. Approval of on-demand service delivery method as recommended to be initiated at the start of the next operations contract, round bracket July 2022, end bracket. Consideration of 1 FTE dedicated to transit in the 2023 budget considerations. And those were passed unanimously at the standing committee. So I'll look to have that moved by Chair Hamlin and seconded by Vice Chair Jeffrey. And is there any item that council wishes to pull for a change in the recommendation? I will allow council members to pull items after we've passed this to speak to them. But are there any items that council wants to change the direction? Seeing none, then I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak to any of the items? Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about item 9.1.1, which is the transit report.
Okay.
And, I just want to get a couple of clarifications because there were some numbers that leapt out at me when I was reading this report. And it's about getting electric buses. And I just want to get clarification on the fact that an electric bus will cost us $1 million per vehicle at this point, where plus $500,000 per quick charge station that we install, plus $125,000 for the overnight charging stations, plus the infrastructure for both of those charging stations and servicing those charging stations, which I think is not contemplated in this report. I'm trying to think about budgets to come and how we're going to pay for this stuff, and the comparing it to the cost of climate change and the things that we can do to prevent it. So are those numbers? I've got those numbers correct?
Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor McLeod. So I believe you do have those numbers correct. I'm just trying to look at some parts of the report to refresh my own memory. But what I can say is this: there is quite a bit of capital costs related to the implementation of the electrification of a transit system, and our transit coordinator, Chris Wisniak, is working with the Metrolinx group, right? That's working on the proposal of the RFP for some of the provisions for buses and services. And I think, our partnership with that group is where we're going to be able to leverage a lot of some expertise, but also help with some numbers, like greater volume, right, of purchases will help us with that. In addition, as we move forward towards the electrification of our fleet, the funding sources that are going to be available, and there's every indication that this is a key direction of future governments, right, is to fund the electrification of services such as transit. So definitely we'll be leveraging those opportunities in leveraging the funding opportunities that are available to us. So using both of those, using our partnership with Metrolinx to kind of get the best that we can get, and then the funding to help us with those as that funding source. So I can't, sorry, I apologize. I can't specifically answer your question on the numbers, but the numbers that you're saying do sound correct to me.
Okay.
Follow-up, Councillor.
Yes, I see some very serious prioritization taking place in future budgets.
Yes.
I have a second question through you, Mayor Saunderson. So even with this is to do with the on-demand part of the report. And so even with the efficiencies that the on-demand model is bringing with it, we're looking at costs page 64 to page 66 of the staff report. We're looking at costs more than doubling in the next 5 years when it comes to transit. $402,000 this year, up to $964,000. So if $350,000 is 1% taxation, as we know from our budget discussions this week, or this month rather, so just about 2% we will need a 2% budget increase to cover transit over the course of the next 2 years, even with this much improved, more efficient way of doing things. And that stuck out to me, and I just wanted to be sure that it was highlighted as part of the report. And I also noticed that the report suggests that over the course of those same 5 years, that our ridership is expected to triple from 42,000 to 43,000 riders in the course of a year. So I just feel as though, in case anybody didn't notice those things in the report, I really want to highlight them for my council colleagues, because we'll have some big decisions to make in the not too distant future. I'm not saying we don't do it. I would like to. I just think that these are things that we need to hold in our heads for next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, any other questions or comments on the items? Okay, thank you. And actually, I think it's 370,000 is now a percentage point on our taxes, but and we'll get to that later in the meeting. All right, and that brings us then to staff reports 10.1, P 2021-38, recommended next steps for a servicing capacity allocation framework for the town of Collingwood. And I will look to Director Valentine to take us through this, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I think we'll let the consultants in. Here we go. We've got our guest joining us, but I will provide a few opening remarks. So the last time we were before this council with the preliminary land use planning policy study recommendations was in early November. And since council's endorsement of those draft products for the purposes of public consultation, the study team did advertise and undertake engagement activities, which included 2 virtual meetings followed by a window for written comments to be received. The sessions were very well attended, with approximately 100 people between the 2 sessions, with some overlap. There were some individuals that attended both sessions, so there may be some double counting in that number. The first session was focused on the development community, and the second session was intended for the general public. And then after those meetings, we did receive approximately 30 comment letters. So on behalf of the study team, we would like to take the opportunity to again thank those that took the time to participate in the engagement sessions, and just let this council know that we did receive a number of extremely well thought out and detailed written submissions, and you will see that the collective comments have resulted in a number of proposed changes to the products tonight. The staff report in your agenda package includes a summary of all the comments that we did hear, as well as the responses from the study team. And we've also included a link that will take you to each of the submissions. So if you would like to read the submissions in their entirety, you're certainly welcome to do so at your leisure as well. Overall, most of the feedback that we did receive focused on the servicing capacity allocation policy, and in particular, the merit-based approach. Just to highlight a few comments that we heard a number of times was that definitions would be needed for some key terms in that document. Additional clarity would certainly be helpful to understand what type of development is subject to the policy and what type of development is not subject to the policy. And that connects to some of the earlier questions that we were talking about with the previous presentation. There was a desire for increased flexibility by broadening the language of some of the criteria, as well as adding some criteria to address active transportation, as well as other community benefits. There was a desire to provide a longer initial time frame for capacity allocation commitment. And in particular, that's to recognize sort of the bulk of upfront work that does need to go into a draft approved plan to get it to the shovel ready stage, especially for those larger scale developments. And similarly, there was a request to increase the phasing threshold within the policy. The last component that I would take the opportunity to highlight was that there was a general sentiment that the merit-based approach should only be applied in the short term when during the water treatment plant expansion. And there was a general desire as well for streamlining for those smaller scale projects, which might not fit in as well with the merit-based criteria. So with that being said, Your Worship, we do have Mr. Nick McDonald, who is the president of Meridian Planning Consultants and the lead of our study team, back today to take us through the detailed changes to the land use planning policy study products, resulting from what we heard from the public engagement. And for those joining us first time via the webcast, he will also provide some brief background statements about the study overall. I'll be returning at the end of the presentation to walk through the proposed next steps. And lastly, just to recognize that we do have former interim director and current advisor to the study team, Mr. Ron Glenn, joining us, as well as community planner Wukash tonight, both of which were integral parts of the process, and they can assist in responding to any questions. So with your permission, Your Worship, we would turn the floor over to Nick, if he is here.
Yeah, I see him. Good to have you back,
Excellent.
Mr. McDonald.
There he is. Oh, okay, excellent. Hi, Nick.
I thought my red jacket would stand out. But, good afternoon or good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm happy to be here this evening to provide you with an update on all of the work that we're completing. Next slide, please. So all of this you already know, but for the purposes of folks who may be listening in, there is an interim control bylaw in effect in the town. It applies until April 26th of 2021. The intent is to pause development until the town develops a framework to allocate water and wastewater capacity. And then, of course, the framework will be relied upon to make decisions as the town continues to grow. My firm was retained in June of 2021 to complete the work. And if we go to the next slide, I'll go through the steps that we have taken. So in July and August, we carried out a best practices review with the focus being on other allocation policy frameworks in municipalities in Ontario. We held a workshop with staff in September to begin the process of developing a path forward. We held a number of councillor interviews, two sessions of councillor interviews, in October. We prepared a draft of the servicing framework in November, and then met with the development community and the public on November 23rd. Both were very well attended, and many great comments were provided to us for our consideration. Since that meeting, we spent the time reviewing all of the comments. As some are indicated, they are summarized as part of the planning report or the report on your agenda. And we began immediately to begin refining the products. And so now we are at a stage where we'd like to present an updated water and wastewater capacity allocation policy. And we have some additional thoughts with respect to the zoning bylaw amendments that we are also recommending, and also with respect to the official plan policies. Next slide. So again, this is a slide that was presented previously. And of course, and I wanted to make sure we all were on the same page in terms of what the intent of this project is. And it is to ensure that capacity is allocated in a sustainable, transparent, and orderly manner, to prioritize allocations of those projects that provide the greatest benefit to the town. And lastly, to establish a process that clearly identifies when and for how long allocation is committed. Those three very basic goals continue to be the goals for this project. Once the allocation policy has been approved by council, it will affect all future decisions on development, and it will apply to most projects that have received ICBL exemptions but have not yet proceeded to building permit. Next slide. So in terms of what the allocation policy does, it identifies what development is and is not subject to the policy itself, and you'll hear a bit more about that in a few minutes. It identifies when allocation is committed and when it expires, both very important. It identifies how to deal with existing approvals, and there are quite a few of them in the town, as you well know. It identifies the criteria that will be relied upon to guide decision-making. This, in our view, is the key component of the policy framework, the merit-based approach, which I'll talk about again in a moment. It deals with how allocation will be monitored and tracked, and then it identifies other implementation mechanisms that are intended to work with the policy we're developing, such as making changes to the zoning bylaw, for example. Next slide. So based on the review of the comments made at the sessions and in writing, it continues to be our opinion and recommendation that a merit-based approach be utilized by the town going forward, because we believe that only those developments that provide the greatest benefit to the town should be proceeding, particularly when there are supply issues as there is now and will be until 2025, 2026. However, we also very much believe in clarity, both in intent and in implementation. And for this reason, we've made a number of changes that are designed to improve the allocation policy document. And I will go through the more significant changes now. So the previous draft did not include definitions, probably should have, but in hindsight, it probably should, only because definitions are very helpful to understand how terms are to be implemented by staff, how they're to be understood by the development community when they're designing their developments and so on. So we figured that we needed these definitions. So we've included quite a number of them, and they include additional residential unit. This is the term used to describe secondary suites and basement apartments, for example. It is the term used by the province in the Planning Act. So we thought we'd add this in here because we are suggesting in the allocation policy that they be exempt from the policy. We've included affordable housing and low and moderate income household definitions from the provincial policy statement to ensure that there's a clear understanding of what affordable housing means. We've added a definition for allocation and allocation policy. Seems kind of silly to do that, but because it is a policy document, we want to make sure people understood what allocation means and what that actually entails. We've added some definitions for design capacity, both for sewage and water, hydraulic reserve capacity, dealing with sewage and water, and uncommitted hydraulic reserve capacity, with these definitions being adapted from provincial guidelines to provide clarity on how capacity is to be measured. It provides some guidance on exactly how the numbers get developed and on what they are based. Next slide. We've also added a limited capacity definition as well. And as you'll hear later, this is basically limited capacity means 80% of design capacity. And that will only be a consideration in the short term or in the future when there are instances where capacity is restricted. And I'll come back to that in a moment too. We've added a single dwelling unit definition for clarity on the unit of measurement itself. And we've added a definition of shovel ready to provide some direction on the interpretation of this term. And for the purposes of this definition, something is shovel ready when it's able to pull permits within 6 months of whatever date the definition is being applied. In terms of other changes, we've clarified where the allocation policy will apply. It was always intended to only apply in urban areas, but the town of Collingwood's quite large geographically. It still has rural areas that are on private services. It was never the intent of this policy to apply to those areas, so we've clarified that. So lands that are generally within the rural designation in your official plan would not be subject to the policy. We've also spent some time, and this came from town staff itself, and in particular the Environmental Services Division, but we spent some time thinking about how capacity is actually determined and by whom. We did receive a number of comments from folks, most notably engineers, who were questioning how these decisions get made. What is the actual capacity? How is it being tracked? How is it being measured? So essentially, what the policy document now says is that the Environmental Services Division would be responsible for identifying what the uncommitted hydraulic reserve capacity is. They would also be responsible for converting the amount of uncommitted hydraulic reserve capacity to SDU equivalents for the purposes of administering the policy. And then lastly, they would establish the amount of uncommitted hydraulic reserve capacity and SDU equivalents there is or there are on a semi-annual basis for the purposes of administering the policy. So we've tightened that up significantly to make it very clear on exactly how these decisions get made in terms of what is available to allocate. We've also simplified what development is subject to the allocation policy. Again, for clarity purposes, and this is in section A5, and just to be clear, it would apply to any development where an extension and or the provision of new water and or wastewater infrastructure is required. It would apply to the creation of any number of new lots or units through the plan of subdivision, vacant land condominium description or consent to sever, or part lot control processes, any development, and we made it clear it's any development, residential, industrial, commercial, and institutional, requiring an official plan and or zoning bylaw amendment and or site plan approval, unless it is exempt, and I'll come back to what that means in accordance with the next section. And then lastly, any development requiring a building permit only, unless it is exempt, again, in accordance with the next section. What we took out of that section were some other ideas on exemptions. It kind of was confusing because we had a short-term exemption idea and a longer-term exemption idea. I think that the town, when the time is right, can think about building in other exemptions, but now is not the time because you do have capacity constraints. In terms of what development is not the subject of the allocation policy, we also made that much more clear. And we did add the development of up to 2 accessory residential dwellings on a commercial property. We had a number of requests made a lot of sense to us to include that. If we were permitting accessory residential units, why wouldn't we permit 2 additional dwelling units on a commercial property in the same manner? So we have done that. We've also included a provision in this section that requires, I guess, as needed, a professional engineer retained by a proponent to provide his opinion on whether a proposed change in use would actually result in any increased demand on services, so that there is some type of process available for that to occur. Next slide. The policy is also being clarified to indicate that all development, unless exempted, would be subject to the allocation policy, including those that received exemptions from the ICBL, but which have not obtained a building permit. The policy is also intended to apply beyond the capacity limited periods, which is 2025, 2026. And as Ms. Valentine indicated, we did receive a number of submissions from folks saying this policy should only apply when you have limitations and not beyond. It's a fair comment, but it's not a decision I think should be made today because there is quite a bit of time between now and then. And this could be easily looked at in the future when council looks at this policy, as they should every year, to conclude and determine that it continues to serve the community well. So we have not got anything in here that says it'll expire or last for a period of time. It will last as long as council wants it to last. We retain decisions. We retain the decision point in the document on capacity allocation at the draft plan approval stage, but we extended the capacity commitment from 24 months to 36 months to match the Planning Act. Planning Act basically says draft plan approval can be given for periods of 3 years or more, and we decided that that made sense to match that up. A number of folks also made comments that 2 years wasn't enough in some cases for them to clear conditions, and they felt it was a little too onerous, and we agreed to change that. We've also increased the threshold for requiring phasing from 100 to 250 SDUs. Each phase would still generally be 100 SDUs, and this was again done to provide additional flexibility and allow for consideration of larger proposals. In the last version of the document, it was indicated that each existing draft plan approval would be looked at and a determination would be made on a case-by-case basis on how to move forward with allocation. And it has been decided that rather than do that, we've revised the policy document to indicate that the conditions of draft plan approval would be amended to indicate that capacity allocations can be considered at registration, And that would be consistent with the extensions to draft plan approval that have been addressed through the ICBL period. This makes sure that all developments are on a level playing field going forward. Next slide. So where a planning act application is not required, that means only a building permit and no consent, no site plan approval, no official plan or zoning. The allocation policy now says that a yearly reserve would be held for development on vacant lots or changes of use where additional capacity is needed. And this allows the town to permit a certain amount of minor development in any given year. Now, we've not set what that amount would be, and that's a discussion item. But our thinking is that there is no need to take people through what some folks perceive to be an onerous process for minor types of development. And that is common in our research, and we think it's something the town should be considering. With respect to the merit-based criteria, we've reduced the minimum score required from 75% to 50% to recognize the non-applicability of some criteria to some developments, but the aspirational target of 75% still remains. And this was done in response to concerns about the challenges in reaching 75%. And for example, a project may not be in the built boundary, it may not be mixed use, it may not be brownfield, and may not be affordable, but it's still a desirable development. And folks were concerned that some developments that were clearly beneficial to the community would not be considered if we applied the higher target. So we've reduced that to 50%. Several criteria are now being measured by degree of compliance instead of a yes or no. That allows for additional flexibility in scoring projects, and this was done in a number of categories. We've included a few new criteria under the efficient use of land and orderly development bucket to include both lands within the built boundary and within existing built-up neighborhoods. Development in both of these areas is deemed to be equally important from a community development perspective, so we provided some additional flexibility there. We've modified the criteria dealing with natural heritage under the conservation and sustainable development bucket that now says as long as you're protecting natural heritage features, that's a good thing and you'll be scored for it. We don't need you to transfer these lands to a public authority in order to obtain points. So that's a change we've also made. Next slide, please. We've also added a new criterion on whether a proposed development supports applicable economic development master plans. And we've has been added, and a number of points available under economic development has been increased for non-residential development. And that further recognizes the importance of this to the town. Affordable housing criteria have been simplified somewhat. The criteria are generally the same, but more emphasis has been placed on affordable housing and housing for special needs in this category. We're close to the end. We've included a new criteria in the community impacts benefits category that deals with compliance with Heritage District Plan. We've included another criterion on a development being neutral or having a positive impact financially on the town. And we've also included another criterion on urban design. We've increased the point score in this category as well. It now counts for up to 10% of the available points. And lastly, we've included a total annual capacity allocation threshold, and that sounds like a mouthful, for when capacity is limited. So this means firstly that no more allocation than available can ever be given. And secondly, that the Collingwood Environmental Services Department can select something less than capacity, 80% is what's being discussed, to provide a buffer in the interim and as the water plant is being expanded. Next slide. With respect to the zoning bylaw, we're suggesting a few small changes to it. As per the comments I made earlier about the rural parts of the town, we wanted to ensure that the new zoning provision we're recommending doesn't affect folks who have permissions in the rural area to develop on private services. and this is being done to ensure that they don't get caught and otherwise require some type of zoning change or minor variance to be able to expand or replace their system, or if they have a vacant lot and it's clearly an area that's not to be serviced, that they can proceed on private services. So we've included that in the draft zoning bylaw amendment recommendation. Secondly, the current ICBL I guess exempts a number of types of minor constructions, renovations, additions, repairs, and so on. And we felt that it was appropriate to carry that forward into the zoning bylaw as well to ensure that both are consistent. Next slide, please. So with respect to the official plan, initially there was a thought that draft plan extensions would only be granted for a one-year period, again, to ensure that certain developers or some developers are not holding on to the capacity for an inordinate amount of time. We did get a bit of pushback on that, and we've decided to maintain that idea in the policy, but allow for extensions beyond that one-year period should extenuating circumstances be demonstrated. I'm going to hand it back over to Ms. Valentine, who will talk about the next steps, and then both Summer and I and Commissioner or Director Slama would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. And here's our final slide for tonight. So before moving into questions that Council may have on the presentation or the products provided in the agenda package, we'd like to leave off with the study team's recommendations for the next step. And there's essentially a different path for each of the three products that collectively make up the town's proposed servicing capacity allocation framework. So let's start with the official plan component. The study team is recommending that the proposed policies be included in the first draft of the new official plan, which is slated to be released early in the new year. It's the opinion of the study team that official plan policies do not need to be in place in order to support the other two components. And given that the official plan is intended to be repealed and replaced in the near term, the most efficient path forward is to combine this component of the recommendations with the official plan update project. Moving on to the second bullet point on the slide, as noted earlier in the previous presentation, the zoning bylaw component is intended as that critical backstop that is required to ensure that building permits can only be issued once adequate capacity is confirmed as available by the municipality. And for this component, the study team is recommending that we move to the required statutory public meeting in January, such that the appeal landscape is known to us prior to April, which is the first year of the ICBL would expire at that time. And then the last component, the allocation policy, which we've spent the bulk of the time discussing in this presentation, it's the product that we really heard the most feedback about. And as you will have noted from Mr. McDonald's comments, there's been several meaningful changes since the initial draft was released. And there is significant community interest in this product, as well as a desire to get it right. And a clear message was also sent through the previous consultation outreach that more time was needed to effectively understand and digest that product. So therefore, the study team is recommending that a second round of public consultation focused on the allocation policy be scheduled for January or February. And again, that would include 2 virtual public sessions, as well as a commenting window to follow for written feedback. So thank you, Your Worship and Council, for the opportunity to provide an update on the land use planning policy study. And we look forward to any questions or comments that you may have as we move into the next stages of the project.
Thank you, Director Valentine and Mr. McDonald. Council, questions or comments on the presentation? Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and a very thorough report. And I think I definitely agree in terms of next steps. But my question has to do with the merit-based approach. Because my initial thought when I read it is it's really watered down, and how much of a foundation is it really providing us going forward in difference to what we're already doing now? And then the other part of that would be, is there a reasonable way to distill this down to certain types of building, to, in other words, have a category that's not within the built boundary, to have another category that's not affordable? To me, it needs to be aspirational to more than 50%. I found that really disconcerting, and maybe that's just because I was raised that 50% wasn't good enough at anything. But those are my questions, and just specific to that. Oh, I did have one too with OP number 1. Do we define what an extenuating circumstance is, or is that something we just develop as we go? And those were my only questions. Thank you.
We might need you to repeat those. There's the 3 questions there, and who wants to take those? Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and through to Councillor Jeffrey. That's a great question. We struggled, to be honest, on the going down below the 75%, but we also felt that we didn't want to create a circumstance through this process whereby nobody would be able to achieve the minimum point score, and that would basically turn the entire allocation policy on its head. So we wanted to be as real as we possibly could in the framework, while providing staff and council with the discretion to make the choices that you need to make going forward. All the right things are still in there. We've just added some more flexibility on how the scoring occurs. And we're certainly open to any suggestions on creating additional categories. The only thing I say in response is that the more we add, the more complicated this gets. And we've already got a lot of things in here already. So I would temper my comment with that in mind. But we'll certainly take that into account. We'll see what the development community and the public think about our approach. We did keep the aspirational 75% in there. We thought that was important. We just didn't want to make that the absolute minimum and then have most projects come in at 72 or 68. And then what do you do? Then you're basically starting over again. So that was part of our thinking. Ms. Valentine, any additional thoughts on that?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, we did, the development community and staff did look at a number of developments that we do have in progress, and it was difficult, as Mr. McDonald said in the presentation, if you didn't sort of have the magic combination of being a heritage property on a brownfield in the built up area. It was really tough to get above that 75%, but these are developments that would have certainly provided a number of community benefits and shouldn't be overlooked just because the threshold wasn't passed. So that is, again, something that we really did struggle with, because we do want to collectively raise the bar and ensure that the developments that receive the capacity are in the best, have the best benefits for our community, but at the same time, we didn't want to make it too difficult so that no developments could achieve that threshold. I guess I would say that in the future, as we implement and as the development community gets used to working with the policy, council can certainly incrementally raise that threshold if that is the desire as well.
Follow-up, Councillor.
Just one, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So another thought in terms of affordable housing and encouraging that, this really isn't the tool for that, other than somebody can get points. I mean, there's going to be a pretty basic 50% people can get to, but then maybe no one will ever choose affordable housing, or so this isn't going to be a tool that's going to be able to help us with that.
Director Valentine. Or Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start to answer that question. It is a tool, but it's not the tool. There are many other tools in the toolbox that you have available to you. And while this is intended to provide some motivation for developers to provide affordable housing, and I think it can work in that way, keeping in mind that when you're dealing with limited capacity, as you are now, the projects that score the highest get your attention. The ones that don't will not get your attention. So I do think it can have a positive effect on delivering affordable housing. but making other changes to your zoning bylaw to, pre-zone lands for additional residential units and other types of housing types. There are a lot of other things you can do to support that. So I would think it is a tool, but one of a number of tools available to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Councillor. And next I have Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to start off with a comment, which is we've had the development community tell us at council, we don't listen. They wish we'd meet with them. We don't listen, we don't listen. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am for the hard work of the team here, because I can see we received so many comments and so many of them have been incorporated into the changes. And I also am appreciative of the fact there's going to be another chance for consultation and comments. I think we've heard that loud and clear and that was wanted. And thank you for making it happen. I wanted to echo the question, some of the questions Councillor had, which, I'm hoping that you can put into this document when you use the words extenuating circumstances, a bracket such as, because having sat here now for 3 years and heard every, let me just put it this way. As you know, we have so many draft plans that are long in the tooth here. And I don't want an extenuating circumstance to simply be, oh, we paid our planner $5,000 to look at it last year, or gee whiz, please feel sorry for us, because I think we've had a lot of that. So anyway, I just wanted to leave that thought with you. And also, I know there's going to be an exemption for projects that don't need OP zoning site plan. And I just wanted, through you, Mr. Mayor, to ask the question, are there any projects in town other than single family homes that might be ready to go, that might have a site plan, for example? Because I just want to make sure we think about that. And I guess mostly it would be industrial things that got started and stopped and so on. But has anyone turned their mind to that? Thank you.
I think I can take that one, or at least start, Your Worship. Thank you, and through you to Councillor Hamlin. If I understand your question correctly, we did provide a different path, let's say, for small existing lots of record, as well as changes of use, that they do not need to go through the merit-based criteria, but there would be an annual cap. And what I think you're asking for is, are there any projects outside of single detached residential dwellings that may fall into that category? We'll have to look to see if there's anything on the horizon, but typically the industrial commercial type developments that you are speaking to would have a site planning component of some type. However, the caveat is that we know just through this recent round of exemptions that we've looked at some changes of use from one commercial use to another, which don't require a Planning Act application. So we can take that back and consult with the planning team and see if there's anything of that nature that we see on the horizon. But there was intended to be that different approach for properties where a Planning Act application is not required, usually because they're smaller scale and lower risk and take up less of a capacity allocation.
Follow-up.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. No, that's a great answer. And I just had another question, and these relate to the affordable housing sections. This is my last area. The definition, firstly, for rental and purchase housing relates to regional market area. That's a definition used. So if the house price is going to be 10% less than the average in the regional market area, that would qualify. And I'm just wondering, firstly, for clarity, if some thought can be given to defining what that means, and maybe importantly, excluding the town of the Blue Mountains, because the housing prices are very high there and maybe not reflective of the rest of the regional housing market. And also on the definition, well, sorry, the affordable housing definition and I'm happy with the housing for purchase part. In terms of the rental housing, the first part is a unit in which the rent doesn't exceed 30% of the gross income of household, low and medium, moderate income households, or rent which is at the average or below the average. So if rent is at the average, it's not really affordable. And I'm just wondering, was this what the intent was behind it? Was it simply to encourage rental housing of any kind? Or anyway, I think I've asked it. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Who would like to take that question? Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I can start. What we did here is incorporate the definition word for word from the provincial policy statement, and it is what all municipalities are theoretically supposed to rely on in making decisions on what is affordable housing. The reference to regional market area, in the case of the County of Simcoe is the County of Simcoe, but as you may be aware through the current municipal comprehensive review, I'm part of that team. We are creating a northern regional market area and a southern regional market area, and it would not include the town of Blue Mountains because that is in another upper tier municipality. Certainly, the numbers are a little challenging to implement, particularly in markets where there isn't a lot of rental housing out there. And making a determination on whether something is affordable is a challenge. I'm not as aware of other town initiatives on the affordable housing side and would defer to Ms. Valentine for any additional comments on that, but that's what I can offer at this point.
Thank you. Director Valentine.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hamlin. Certainly, this is where we started with the provincial policy statement definitions to be consistent with the other planning instruments, and realizing that the recommendations coming out of the Affordable Housing Task Force are really in their infancy. There would be an opportunity to replace these definitions with Collingwood specific definitions should we choose to in the future. The study team was hesitant at this point, given that, like I mentioned, the recommendations are so fresh from our Affordable Housing Task Force, and how we might want to translate their thoughts into policy, we felt needed more discussion. But that's certainly a point that we can look at, and in the future, should we have town-specific definitions that we want to implement in this way.
Thank you.
Hey, yes, lastly, Mr. Mayor, just a follow-up to that. Because I sat on that Affordable Housing Task Force, it's all still so fresh in my mind, and how general this is compared to the level of discussion we had around this whole issue. So I'm wondering, perhaps I'll just start by, would it be helpful if I just set out in writing to one or both of you my thoughts on this without taking up any more time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Clearly a ton of work went into this, and I thank you for your hard work and your attention to detail. I understand that the framework ends, or rather does not end, when the new water treatment plant comes online in 2025, hopefully 2026, probably. Can one of you speak, please, to why we would continue to need the allocation framework once we have all the water in the lake? Through you, Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald?
Certainly. Well, I guess my first answer is that it is always good planning to make good decisions that take into account servicing and other community land use planning considerations, and making decisions just based on where the pipes are in the ground and how much capacity there is, in our view, is not good enough. There needs to be a much better relationship between servicing and land use planning going forward. And quite frankly, in the future, the town may want to move beyond this policy in some way and actually identify areas in the town which are prioritized for development from a geographical perspective, so that there's a little bit more clarity on this. But until we get there, this is how you do it. But I do think that there always is a need to ensure that allocation is being handed out to those who really are ready to go and who are providing some benefit back to the community. It also provides an opportunity for the town and its staff to negotiate the best development deal for the town. And the more levers you have in the toolbox and the more tools you have in the toolbox, the better off you are. Having said all of that, this is a council document. Council can change it, eliminate it, or do whatever it feels is necessary in the future. But we certainly think that in the interim, this is the way to go. And something like this should be in place over the long term, maybe not as detailed, but something that provides you with some additional leverage when you're negotiating where development is going to occur and under what conditions. Those are my thoughts. Ms. Valentine may have some additional thoughts on that too.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Nick, and through your worship to Councillor McLeod. I would echo generally Nick's response. The only other piece that I would highlight is this policy is intended to cover both water and wastewater. So while we're in a limited capacity situation for water now, the next place we'll turn our eye to is wastewater capacity and what that might look like over the long term. And in addition, water and wastewater infrastructure is one of the biggest expenses for a municipality, and there will always be a threshold. There will always be a when's the next expansion that needs to be considered. So making the most prudent decisions, even in times where capacity seems unlimited, is the way that we're suggesting to move forward. But as Mr. McDonald says, there's time for council to readjust at any point post 2025 should they feel that the policy should be simplified or otherwise changed to address these types of questions.
Follow-up, Councillor?
No, but I do have an additional question that is related, not a follow-up. So we have, as you know, developments that are in the pipe, as it were, ready to go. And there has been some concern expressed that even though they've already, got the lines drawn and the sales centers thought through, that they may not actually make the 75% threshold. And so the 50%, I'm sure, is a great relief to some. However, would there be a time that a development would come forward that would not even make the 50? And could you please speak through you, Mr. Mayor, to what would happen in that situation? And the reason I ask this, just to provide some clarity to my thinking regarding the question, is my understanding, limited though it was at the beginning of the term, was you can never say no because you'll just get taken to the OMB, OLT, LPAT, whatever it's called today, and you will always, as municipality, lose. And is this our method of not losing in those situations? Is that this is our bulwark against that? Or is this us piloting our own future? I'm not sure to whom to direct that, Mayor Saunderson.
I think Mr. McDonald's unmuted, so I'll let him go first.
Yeah, thank you. This may be more of a legal question than a planning question, but in my view, a municipality it is the job of the municipality to determine how to allocate a resource it's responsible for providing. And once you develop a policy framework that does that, it is the policy framework. And if a developer is not happy with that, as long as you've gone through this process in a fair and transparent manner, I think you're in a very good position to defend it going forward. That's my first bottom line answer. In terms of how decisions get made, the policies do allow for some discretion on the part of council to make decisions in circumstances like as you've identified, where a proposal comes in and for whatever reason doesn't score whatever it should be scoring, but there are other benefits perceived or otherwise that are good, and you make a decision on that basis. So we've left some flexibility in for council to make those kinds of decisions. We're pretty hopeful that most developers would be able to exceed the 50% threshold. We still want to do some more testing of that for sure moving forward. we'll be happy to report back to you when that occurs. And then the last thing I'll say is that based on my understanding of the draft approvals that are out there is a lot more draft approved than you can actually allocate. So you will have to be making some decisions, and some of them are going to be tough. And it is what it is until the situation is fixed. And this will help you make those decisions, so you're not just doing it on an ad hoc basis.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you to my colleagues for the questions that they've already asked. Much appreciated. Having had the opportunity to sit in on both the developer meetings and the public meetings, I think that you have done a very good job in accommodating a lot of the questions and concerns that were expressed. Generally, I have to say that I was quite surprised at the disconnect between what our development community had to say about this proposed framework, which for the most part was very nervous, very concerned, and in the worst cases, very opposed to any kind of a merit-based approval system. To our public, who used words like bold and enlightened, and so many other words having to do with an overall consistency with our community-based strategic plan that we hadn't seen before to the same degree in approval of new development. I guess one question one concern that I have, and I also will formulate a more complete response as a member of council, because you'll be looking for feedback, but the reduction of the minimum score to 50 rather than 75, although I know you've played with the scoring somewhat, I just hope that this doesn't have the net effect of lowering the bar, as opposed to those bold and enlightened merit-based criteria that this proposal first envisioned. I think that these criteria should be aspirational for our development community. And so, as an example, if a development does not consider green energy and wastewater management as an example, that the opportunity is to add that to a proposed development in order to improve score. If you see me, I mean, if you get me, this is a great opportunity, I think, for both our residents and for our development community. The other concern I think I have generally is that the merit-based system should ever go away. After this is over, after we have hopefully been able to achieve higher quality of development for our residents, I hope that we can maintain these standards going forward. And then just because we have an endless supply of water, that we don't throw away all the good criteria that we have used to approve those developments which did get a water allocation. So just some comments really, as opposed to questions. And there were some other areas that I also had questions, but I will include them in a response to you later.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think those are very good points you're making. And I was thinking as you were talking, I do a lot of thinking on the fly, that it may make some sense to include requirements in this system that need to be met no matter what, such as water conservation, for example. I think every developer has to consider that. It shouldn't be a throwaway. It shouldn't be something that gets added in only because it helps the point total. So we could turn our mind to there being some minimum thresholds that you have to meet even to be considered in this policy framework, and we'd be more than happy to take a look at that.
Councillor.
Great, thank you. Good.
All right. It's been a good discussion, so I'll read in the resolution. And it reads as follows. The report 2021-38 recommended next steps for a servicing capacity allocation framework for the town of Collingwood be received. And further, that the proposed official plan policies be incorporated into the first draft of the town's updated official plan. And further, that a statutory public meeting be scheduled and notice provided in accordance with the Planning Act for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. And further, that the revised servicing capacity allocation policy be endorsed for the purpose of a second round of public consultation. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor McLeod. And seeing no further comments, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much to staff and Mr. McDonald. This is a big undertaking for our community, an extremely important one. And I think we're heading in a good direction, and more input's necessary to get that final tweaking. So thank you. And that brings us then to motions. 11.1, Minister's zoning order to expedite potential locations of affordable housing. Councillor Jeffrey, you provided your notice at the last meeting on December 13. While I read it, do you have it in front of you?
I do.
Okay, then go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So moved by me and seconded by Councillor Berman, that council directs staff to investigate and report back regarding the ability to use the minister's zoning order, MZO, to expedite the potential locations of affordable housing. And just by way of explanation, there was some reaction this past week, not understanding that this is just an educational piece to have an understanding as to how communities in Ontario were able to use MZOs to generate 3,700 long-term care rooms or beds. And so the curious side of me wanted to know if there's any benefit to municipalities using MZOs in terms of affordable housing and generating that. And there's nobody better to tell us that than our excellent planning staff. And I know that they always describe we have lots of tools in the toolbox, but I don't want to leave any stone unturned in terms of understanding the tools and when we can use them. And I do understand there are other municipalities who have used the MZO for affordability, and I would just like for council to have a better understanding of that in I guess in comparison or in addition to the other tools we have at our disposal, because the official plan policy things just seem to be too slow. And so the curious side of me wanted to know if they could do it for long-term care, why couldn't we do it for affordable housing, and hence the request.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. So we've got the motion on the floor. Questions or comments, council? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. With respect to my colleague, I think that even though this is just a request for a staff report, I believe that it is a slippery slope. even in entertaining the notion of any kind of provincial interference at the local level. And I don't see how this order could in any way improve on all of the tools that we have in our toolbox and expedite any kind of development, including affordable development, in a way that is going to be any quicker than what we can do with our own resources and resources that we see improving as a result of this water allocation policy that we're just entertaining today. Further, you referenced the notion of using an MZO potentially to facilitate the development of affordable housing, but there's no guarantee once it has been passed that what you have asked for is what you're going to get. And I will allude to a MZO that was implemented recently in the city of Vaughan that originally had promised 10% affordable units, but that the developer has reneged on that vow of 10% affordable units. And there are no conditions in the wording of the MZO to force that commitment. And finally, just in December of this year, the Auditor General has called out MZOs as undermining the land use process. So I believe that given all the downside, and given all of the requests for staff reports and other work from our staff, I don't understand why we would be even asking for this additional work for in my view, very questionable direction.
Fair enough.
Councillor, any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've heard two, dramatically opposed views on this, and I'm sure the right answer is somewhere in the middle. I think what I heard sitting on the Affordable Housing Task Force is that, the development community at least seems to think it can be 6 to 8 to 10 years to get a site, designated rezoned site plan and get ready to build, by which time we'll have had no affordable housing built in our community potentially, and which will put us in a really bad situation in terms of our workforce. I think with an MZO, if this turned out to be something that could be used for this purpose, we don't have to undermine the public process. We could combine public meetings and consultations and changing. And I'm mindful of that Vaughan situation that Councillor Doherty mentioned. I read about it in the paper, and I even thought that perhaps the province indicated that they didn't think they could issue an MZO for affordable housing that would be effective. So to my mind, I would like to know more, because if we could combine some kind of public process, if we could make sure that it would get us what we wanted, in other words, affordable housing, and would shave years off the time before we could get a building permit issued, I would be, I would like to know that. So I'll vote in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I have one. Director Valentine, I'm wondering, on the MZO process, my understanding is it doesn't eliminate a number of planning processes that would be required. And maybe you would part of this report talk about how the MZO process would impact our local planning policies and what it would look like. And once the MZO is granted, how does the proposal proceed from there?
Yes, certainly, Your Worship. If it's the desire of council to have an educational type report, we could cover those next steps in the process. As per the name, MZO, Minister's Zoning Order, it does address the zoning component of a development application, but typically there are land use planning processes that would follow, including plans of subdivision or site plan control typically. So we can speak to that if the staff report is a desirable path.
Thank you for that. And then the council question to Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor, would you like to see that type of information included in the report that you're requesting?
Yes, absolutely. Great.
Okay. All right. We've had good discussion, and so I will call the vote. All in favor? And opposed? So noted, and that is carried. And the next motion that we have, 11.2, deals with the South Georgian Bay Innovation and Technology Accelerated Board of Directors appointment, and it reads as follows. Whereas Council passed Resolution 05-2021 supporting the creation of an independent not-for-profit business accelerator for South Georgian Bay for the purpose of retaining and growing Collingwood-based companies, and provided the ability to appoint a member to the South Georgian Bay Innovation and Technology Accelerator Board of Directors. Therefore, be it resolved that Council hereby appoint Brian Herner as a voting member of the South Georgian Bay Innovation and Technology Accelerator Board of Directors for a term ending March 31st, 2023. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Berman. And unless there's questions or comments on this exciting development, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 12, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion tonight, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to, I just penned something while I was sitting here. So I'm happy for staff to change this before it comes back in January. But my motion would be that there be no regular council meetings scheduled during the December school holiday break or the March break. And this would be to make sure that our parents on council are, whether this term or the next term, are freely able to participate in council without having to juggle this. I'll of course speak to it next week, but I certainly know as a parent of children in the school system, years ago, but I never worked during the school holidays. You've got kids out of school, and I know, for example, Councillor Comey tonight is, engaged in holiday activities with kids out of school. So that's what I wanted to read in. Thank you.
I see the clerk has her hand up. Go ahead, Sarah.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Hamlin. We do have new provisions and rules regarding notice of motions in our procedural bylaw. So we'll have to, we'll work with you following this meeting regarding the next meeting that it can appear at.
All right, thank you. And as I indicated at the outset of the meeting, for Christmas, everyone's getting a hard copy of the procedural bylaw. So now we've made those numerous changes. So moving forward, we can all be on the same page there. So thank you. That brings us then to bylaws 13.1, 2022 municipal budget bylaw. And the resolution reads that bylaw number 2021-92 being a bylaw to adopt 2022 municipal budget estimates be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. And I see that Treasurer Quinlan's appeared, but I'll get a mover and a seconder just to get this on the floor. Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman, and then I'm going to pass it over to Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the members of council. We don't have a presentation this evening, but I just wanted to mention the few changes that have occurred since the last time we met, which would have been last Monday, I suppose. So they're also included, these changes are included on page 2 of the budget document that is posted on the town's website, both under the engage page for the 2022 municipal budget and also on our normal budget and taxes page. So there's been 5 changes. They have not impacted the tax impact, but have been changed nonetheless. The first one is Sunset Point Playground. We had formerly funded this through reserve funds, but now we've changed and we're going to be using our federal gas tax funding. There's again a 0 tax impact on that. We've also included design and engineering on Peel Street, Hume to Bush. I had originally in my own right taken it out after timing was updated and missed that the design and engineering should remain there. So that will continue into 2022 as well. Mountain Road widening, we updated the development charge portion of the funding to the appropriate rate. Again, a 0 tax rate impact. And Huron and Niagara crosswalk, there is a carryover from 2021, and that's just due to the timing of payments. And finally, we've also added the communications position being subject to the approval of a communications plan and strategy by council prior to the position being hired. And further, that if the plan isn't agreed upon by members of council, that the funding would then be forwarded to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, and again, a 0 tax rate impact. So once again, we remain at a 2% tax rate increase, which means that for a median assessed household, they can expect an increase of around $45.90 for the municipal portion only of their property taxes. I feel like this is a responsible and progressive budget, and that it continues to address council's vision and the interests of the public, and most notably in the areas such as affordable housing, economic issues, climate change, infrastructure, and it also includes that modest property tax rate increase we just spoke about. Staff are very appreciative of the public comments and participation throughout the budget process, including the survey, and would like to just remind everyone once again that the budget package and the engagement opportunities are included on the town's Engage website. So thank you, Your Worship. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Monica. Council, any questions or comments? Seeing none, I have one. And since being involved in council, this is an annual financial plan that looks at accomplishing the needs of our community. And going back to 2015, when I first joined council, we started out then with our program-based budgeting, which was a big change at the time. But just for some context, I think looking at the overall evolution of our town's financial position over that period of time is important too, because although these are year-to-year exercises, there's a longer-term financial strategy. And when 2015, we were in a net deficit position of about $6 million. And as of December 31 last year, we were at a net positive position of $34 million. So a $40 million swing. And I think we're in a similar position this year, although we don't have the exact numbers. And in terms of our debt load, it was about $36 million of external debt. And now, and at the time, that was about 8.7% of our total revenues went to paying off our debt servicing costs. And we passed the resolution then that we weren't going to borrow money as a council, that we've continued through this term until we got below 7%. And I think we've done that this year in 2021. I'll look to Treasurer Quinlan, but I think our debt servicing costs are about 6.9% of our total revenue sources. So we have achieved that milestone. And this year's budget, I think, is a very, as Treasurer Quinlan said, very responsible, but I think it's also very responsive to the needs of our community. And during the engagement process, we asked the community what their priorities were, and they listed affordable housing as the #1 issue. The economy and jobs is #2. The environment and climate change is #3. Infrastructure and transportation is #4, and #5 is property taxes. And as Treasurer Quinlan pointed out, we are moving the bar forward on all of those 4 topics, and we are doing it with a very responsible 2% increase this year, coming on the back of a 0% increase last year. So we're working very hard at Town Hall to provide the services and do it in a way that respects the taxpayers' dollars. So that being said, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And thank you very much, Treasurer Quinlan and staff, for your work in getting this budget where it is today. And the next bylaw is the standing committee appointments. And it reads as follows: the bylaw number 2021-93 being a bylaw to appoint a member to the Trails and Active Transportation Advisory Committee be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. And the bylaw number 2021-94 being a bylaw to appoint a member to the Accessibility Advisory Committee be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. And under that bylaw number 2021-95 being a bylaw to appoint a member of the Museum Advisory Committee be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. I'm going to look to Clerk Almus, if you can just identify the individuals that we're appointing and to which board, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. For the museum, we have Stuart Beeston. For accessibility, we have Gina Northcott. And for trails, we have Dave Stamper.
Thank you very much for that, and congratulations to our new appointees, and thank you for all the volunteers who applied. And with that being said, I'm going to call the vote. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't get a mover second yet, did I? All right, Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Berman. I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 14, the consent agenda. The resolution reads: the council herein received the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. We have 5 items tonight. 14.1, BILD ICBL Servicing Allocation Policy and Land Use Planning Study. 14.2, GTDI ICBL Servicing Allocation Policy Comments. 12, 4th Street Heritage Permit Petition from Jesse Hamilton, read 12th 4th Street Heritage Permit. Dr. Duncan Bristow, MZO motion, and Norm Wingrove, MZO motion. And I'll first get the motion on the floor, and we'll receive the items, and then I'll ask if anyone wishes to pull an item. So first, just to get this on the floor, Councillor Berman, Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Are there any items to be pulled, Council? Seeing none, that brings us to Council business, item 15, old or deferred business. Is there any old or deferred business tonight? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Just a housekeeping issue, I think, that I've spoken to the deputy clerk about, and about altering or correcting minutes from a previous meeting which have been approved already. And I just wanted to turn through you, Mayor Saunderson, to the clerk for clarification on whether this needs a motion or not. The minutes in question were from October the 25th, and there was a mistake on the who was present and who was not.
Okay, I'll look to Clerk Almus. Sarah?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you to Councillor McLeod for bringing that to our attention. The clerk is allowed to make minor adjustments to the minutes that are factual changes, and this was brought to my staff's attention today, and that will be updated to ensure our attendance records are correct.
Thank you so much.
Any other old or deferred business, Council? Seeing none, that takes us to other business. Any other business tonight? Seeing none, gets us right to the confirmatory bylaw. 16.1 reads that bylaw number 2021-96 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held December 20, 2021 be enacted and passed this 20th day of December 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman, Councillor Doherty, and I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. It's been a busy day, Council. Thank you to everyone for your attention and hard work, and staff too. And this being our last meeting, I hope everyone has a healthy and happy break, and that you're able to get together with your family members, provided there's under 10, and or in the room at any one time. And with that being said, I'll look for the motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everyone.